Yep, when you're ready, go ahead.
Okay, sweet. So as I assume you guys know, the policy case question that we're looking at today is United States political leaders are proposing new restrictions on international imports of steel in the form of tariffs and quotas. Are these proposals a good idea? And so we intend to lay out the arguments both for and against them, and then give a recommendation that we as a team think is the best policy. So to start, I'm gonna say a couple things again, an argument against these tariffs and quotas, because we are, like, the idea here is that we are advocating for the freest market possible, right? And so these tariffs and quotas, they're going to increase the price of those international goods that are being imported in. And so we believe that people should have the choice to choose domestic or foreign goods, and increasing the price of some of those goods can limit the utility and therefore arguably the flourishing of the consumers who are buying them. And so leaving these tariffs and quotas behind will leave those international options as cheap as they can be, which allows people to make the choices that are best for them. And then we also believe simply that politicians simply should not have the power to have influence over the purchasing choices that we get to make. So we are simply arguing for the freest market possible and the most choices possible in order to let individuals choose how they flourish.
Okay, so I am representing the side that's for the tariffs, a more nationalist perspective, if you will. So if we do implement the tariffs, then foreign steel would be more expensive. So hypothetically, the consumers will buy American, domestically produced steel, which is better for the economy. So the money will go out of the American consumers' pockets and right back into the American economy. This will lead to more revenue for domestic businesses and will allow the economy to further flourish. This does limit free markets and competition, but overall for improving the American economy. And while complete freedom is ideal, the American people elect their politicians to represent them and their interests. Therefore, enacting these tariffs will ensure that money from American pockets goes right back into our own economy.
All right, so now that both of these views have been presented, the first, which was against these tariffs and quotas that would be imposed on the imports of steels, and then the second argument, which was for these tariffs and quotas on steel to protect the domestic American goods. I'm going to present our group's recommendation and what we feel most aligns with the free markets and views that we've been presented. So our recommendation would be to be against these tariffs and quotas. This would help maintain the free market and also maintain competition. Consumers would have the choice of choosing between buying international goods that are being imported or also to have goods that are domestically produced, and they can make those decisions to buy the goods. I want to reference for these two different sources that were in the readings. So the first is Peter Leeson's 2 Cheers for Capitalism, and the second is Doug Bandeau's Freedom and Virtue Are Inseparable. So with the first, Peter Leeson was basically making the argument that there's no level of capitalism that does not lead to flourishing and more growth for the nations. In the nations where he saw they had more growth towards capitalism and more capitalist views, there was more flourishing for income, for life expectancy, for education, and for democracy. Overall, these nations were better off than the ones who had capitalism that was backsliding. On those views, they had decreased in all of those compared to the nations who were increasing in capitalism. And so the argument was made that some level of capitalism is necessary, but with bounds. And so Peter Leeson argued against this, that regulation could impose these negative effects on the nations. And then Doug Bandeau, in his article on Freedom and Virtue Are Inseparable, he was saying that to have virtue would lead to more freedom and more flourishing. But with regulations in place, you're not truly having virtue because you're not making these choices freely by yourself. Therefore, by removing these tariffs and quotas on international steel, people would be able to have the choice to choose where they use their purchasing power at. If they chose, they could buy this cheaper international goods and flourish in that way. Or if they choose to, they liked the more national view of the domestically produced goods, then they could use their virtue and their purchasing power to choose those goods. So overall, our recommendation is against the tariffs and quotas on international imports of steels for these views we've outlined. All right, thank you.
Okay, hold on. We've got time for our judges to ask open-ended questions to you guys.
Yes.
So given that you guys are advocating not to implement the tariffs and the quotas, and it seems like you're acknowledging that the tariffs and quotas might save some industry in the United States, but it will come at an expense to the rest of the consumers in the United States. Why isn't the losses that the steel industry, those workers, why isn't the fact that the losses they would suffer are higher, like per capita? Why doesn't that outweigh the benefits that are accrued, that are minimal, small benefits, but they go to more people? Does that question make sense?
Yeah. I can speak on that a little bit. So yeah, I do agree that.
You can use the mic. There you go.
I do agree that for the steel industry, it could have an effect on those workers by some of the lost revenue that they might have from people buying those other international steel. In that case, that's kind of a choice of consumer goods, and overall, the benefit to the overall population could outweigh the benefit or the reduced benefit that that steel industry was having. In that case, it would be kind of a matter of looking at the statistics on that and seeing if there was some equilibrium between them. Because it might be the case that if you were to look at the numbers, that the steel industry is losing more revenue and that it might actually be helpful to have those tariffs. But with the information we had, we were making the argument for it as a generalized argument.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, my question is, yes, if we have let's say import steel tariff and quotas, do you think the exporting country, steel exporting country, they will have kind of a fight against the U.S. policy? Probably they will have a tariff for the U.S. exporting the goods. Do you think they will have that kind of a counter effect?
So are you asking about maybe like the backlash that
Yeah,
they might have?
that's right.
Okay.
What's your thing?
I think that is a distinct possibility. Like every policy, every action that you take is going to have potential consequences. And so at that point, it's a matter of like we're dealing with such limited information here of like looking at and theorizing and kind of thinking about what the backlash to that could be and if the consequences are worth the benefits of the tariffs in place. Like that's something that we don't know with information that we've been given, but with more like real data is something you could look at. And if that backlash outweighs the benefits of the tariff, then I mean that feels like a pretty easy choice against them.
We got time for another, or if we're all set? We're all set. All right, thank you, Pitt State.